The Vampire King's daughter was born mute, until the Black Maid did what no one expected. The sun dipped behind the jagged mountains, casting long shadows over the sprawling crimson castle. Its towers pierced the blood-red sky, and the air smelled faintly of roses and old stone. The castle had stood for centuries, a monument to power, mystery, and fear. Within its halls, whispers carried like ghosts, and eyes watched from shadowed corners. No one dared disturb the silence, for the master of the castle was the Vampire King, Lord Werewolf, a ruler of immeasurable power, whose very presence could bend the will of both man and beast. In a quiet wing of the castle, far from the echoing halls of the court, a small figure moved like a shadow among shadows. She was Lilith, the daughter of the Vampire King. Lilith had been born mute. From the moment of her birth she had never spoken a word, and yet, even in silence, her presence was magnetic. Her eyes, a deep violet that seemed to hold the night itself, watched everything. She observed the world with the careful attention of someone who had long been forced to communicate without words. Despite her silence, the court treated her with awe and unease. Courtiers whispered that her muteness was a curse, a shadow placed upon the royal line. Servants avoided her, afraid to offend the young princess, while the nobles gave her gifts she could not ask for and flattery she could not return. Lilith often felt as though she were a ghost wandering among the living, seen but not truly known. Only one person ever approached her with warmth: Mara, the Black Maid. Mara's hair was as dark as midnight, and her eyes held secrets of a life that had not been easy. She had served in the castle longer than anyone remembered, moving silently through the corridors, tending to the needs of both the living and the restless spirits that lingered in the halls. Unlike the other servants, Mara never recoiled from Lilith. She knelt beside the child, brought her wildflowers plucked from the gardens, or told stories with the flicker of a candlelight, stories that seemed to awaken the young princess's imagination. "Do you like the roses, little one?" Mara whispered one evening, her voice soft and steady. Lilith's fingers brushed the petals gently, her eyes shining with a rare spark of joy. Though she could not reply with words, her small smile spoke volumes. Mara knew then that Lilith had heard her, had understood her. The Vampire King watched from a distance, his tall frame hidden behind a column of marble. He was a man of immense presence, his pale skin seeming to glow faintly in the dim light, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. He had ruled the kingdom for decades, feared and respected by all. Yet when he looked at his daughter, a strange tension gripped him. He could see the longing in her eyes, the quiet yearning for connection, and he realized with a chill that he had never truly known her at all. That night, as the castle grew quiet, Mara led Lilith to the balcony overlooking the gardens. The moon rose, full and pale, casting silver light across the stone paths and blooming flowers. A gentle breeze stirred Lilith's dark hair, and for a moment she leaned into it, her eyes closed as if tasting the air itself. "You're brave," Mara whispered. "Braver than anyone gives you credit for." Lilith's hand found Mara's, gripping it tightly, a silent acknowledgement of trust. In that moment, Mara felt a pang in her chest, a fierce desire to protect the girl at any cost. Lilith's innocence was fragile, yet beneath it, there was a strength that Mara sensed would one day shake the foundations of the world. The next morning brought unease. Rumors had begun to stir through the court, whispers of shadows that moved without light, of eyes that glowed in the darkness, drawn to the princess. The rival clans of vampires had long sought the bloodline of Lord Werewolf, knowing that a child born with silence carried power that was both rare and unpredictable. Some said the silence was a blessing, others a curse. Either way, Lilith had become the center of attention, though she remained blissfully unaware of the danger that crept closer with every passing day. In the great hall, courtiers moved with cautious grace, eyes darting toward Lilith as she sat in her high-backed chair, a silent observer of the politics and power games that played around her. Mara hovered nearby, ensuring the young princess never felt alone. "Your Highness," one nobleman said with a bow, "may I present a gift?" He held out a small box, carved from ebony and inlaid with silver runes. Lilith's eyes studied the box silently, and Mara lifted the lid for her. Inside lay a delicate music box. The figure of a tiny dancer spun slowly, its movements hypnotic, almost lifelike. Lilith reached out a hand, and as the music began, she swayed slightly, her expression softening in wonder. The vampire king entered then, his presence commanding the room. Conversation ceased, and even the dancers in the music box seemed to pause. Lord Vailric's gaze fell on Lilith, lingering longer than was customary. For the first time in years, he saw her not as a daughter of the throne, but as a child longing for connection. Yet even as the room held its breath, the danger that had been whispered of made itself known. From the shadows of the hall, a figure watched with cold interest. A rival vampire, cloaked in black, his eyes glinting with malice, had come seeking the princess. He moved silently, invisible to the guards, drawn by the unusual aura that surrounded Lilith. No one noticed him, not even the vigilant courtiers, but Mara did. Her senses had been honed over years of service, and the prickling at the back of her neck warned her that trouble was near. That night, Mara stayed by Lilith's side as she slept in her canopy bed. The wind howled through the castle, carrying with it the scent of danger. Lilith stirred, reaching out in her sleep, and Mara's hand met hers. "I won't let anything harm you," she whispered. Lilith's fingers twitched in response, a tiny but meaningful gesture of trust. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the window. The rival vampire had come closer, curious about the girl's silent power. Mara's eyes snapped open, and she moved instinctively to block the window. Her heart pounded. She could sense the predator's intent. He had not come merely to observe, but to test, to challenge, to strike. With a swift motion, Mara drew a hidden dagger, a weapon blessed against dark magic. The shadow outside hissed, recoiling slightly, then disappeared into the night. Mara exhaled slowly, trying to calm her racing heart. She turned to Lilith, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "It's all right," she murmured. "You're safe." Lilith's hand found Mara's once again, a silent promise of trust and reliance. The following days were tense. Guards were doubled, corridors patrolled, and every shadow was watched with suspicion. Yet through it all, Mara continued her quiet work, teaching Lilith to communicate through gestures, drawing, and small sounds. Lilith's eyes began to sparkle with curiosity and understanding, and slowly a bond grew that no threat could sever. One evening, under the moonlight in the castle garden, Lilith took a bold step. She reached out, her small hand brushing against Mara's cheek. It was a gentle, hesitant touch, yet full of meaning. Mara's breath caught. She leaned closer, her own hand covering Lilith's in a protective gesture. The connection between them deepened, silent but undeniable. From the shadows, unseen and silent, the rival vampire observed. His eyes narrowed, recognizing the unusual bond forming between the princess and the Black Maid. He realized that any attempt to harm Lilith would have to go through Mara, a woman whose skill and loyalty were as dangerous as any weapon. That night as the castle slept, Lilith dreamed. In her dream, voices whispered, calling her name, begging her to speak, to break the silence that had always confined her. She woke with a start, her fingers trembling, and for the first time she felt the stirrings of a voice within her. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Mara, sensing the change, knelt beside her. "Soon," she said softly. "Soon the world will hear you." Lilith's hand found Mara's once more, and in that small, quiet gesture a promise was made, a promise that no darkness could undo and no shadow could break. But even as hope began to bloom, the castle itself seemed to shift. The wind carried whispers of old curses, of enemies gathering beyond the mountains, and of power long hidden awakening within the princess. The stage was set, and the first threads of fate were being woven into a tapestry of danger, courage, and unexpected bonds. Outside, under the silver moon, the rival vampire lingered, watching the balcony where Lilith and Mara had shared their quiet moment. His lips curved into a faint smile. "So, the mute child has a protector," he whispered. "This will make the game far more interesting." And within the castle, Lilith stared at the moon, her hand still resting in Mara's. For the first time, a flicker of hope danced in her violet eyes. She did not yet know what the future held, nor the power that slept within her. But she felt, deep in her soul, that she was not alone, and somewhere in the silent corridors the shadows stirred. The night was far from over. The castle had never felt so quiet, yet the silence was heavy with anticipation. Every footstep of the guards echoed unnaturally through the marble halls. Every whisper carried weight. Lilith sat by the window in her room, gazing out at the moonlight that spilled over the gardens. The silver glow reflected in her violet eyes, and for the first time she felt a strange warmth stirring inside her, a quiet, new feeling that was neither fear nor sadness. Mara knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand over Lilith's. "You're safe for now," she said softly. "But we cannot ignore what watches us in the shadows." Lilith's eyes met Mara's, and in that unspoken exchange, Mara understood something powerful. Lilith was ready to act, to take control of the silent strength she had hidden for so long. The previous night had changed something in the castle. Lilith's fingers trembled as she reached for the candle, almost as if she could feel the voice inside her pushing to be free. She had felt it in her dreams, the call to speak, the whisper of power within her bloodline. Mara, sensing the moment, guided Lilith's hand to a small silver bell. "Ring it slowly," Mara instructed. "Let the sound reach your ears, let it teach you the taste of noise." Lilith's small fingers gripped the bell. She hesitated, fear and excitement warring within her, then shook it gently. The soft chime filled the room, vibrating against the walls, and for the first time Lilith smiled in triumph. "That's it," Mara whispered, her own heart trembling. "You made the first sound, and it is beautiful." Lilith's violet eyes sparkled with wonder. She did not yet speak, but the act itself, the deliberate creation of a sound, felt like a door opening in her chest. She was no longer completely silent. Outside the castle, the night seemed to grow darker. The rival vampire, whose presence had gone unnoticed by the guards, moved like a shadow through the surrounding forest. His eyes glowed faintly red in the moonlight, and he watched the castle with interest. "So she is not truly voiceless," he murmured to himself. "The princess may have power, and the maid protects her. This will make the game more intriguing." He vanished into the trees, leaving only a ripple of cold air in his wake. Inside the castle, Mara continued her patient work with Lilith. She brought paper, charcoal, and small brushes. "Draw what you feel," she instructed. Lilith hesitated, but then slowly began to sketch the moon, the shadows of the castle, and finally, a small figure with outstretched hands reaching toward another. Mara watched, realizing the drawing was a reflection of the bond forming between them. "You understand so much, Lilith," Mara said softly. "Your silence does not hide your thoughts. You are speaking in your own way." Lilith's fingers brushed Mara's hand, an answer full of trust and gratitude. Meanwhile, the court remained tense. Rumors had begun to spread about the princess's strange abilities. Some nobles whispered that her muteness was a sign of hidden power, a curse tied to the vampire bloodline. Others said that the Black Maid was not simply a servant, but a dangerous figure who held influence over the royal child. Lord Vaelric, aware of the whispers, felt a stirring of unease mixed with curiosity. He walked silently through the halls, observing the interactions between Lilith and Mara. The sight unsettled him. He had long considered Mara a loyal servant, but now he wondered if her loyalty carried consequences he could not yet understand. His daughter, so long silent and vulnerable, was beginning to emerge in ways that unsettled the carefully controlled order of his household. One evening, during the castle's twilight hour, Mara led Lilith to the library, a vast hall of ancient books, scrolls, and secrets long forgotten. Candles flickered in sconces along the walls, casting shadows that danced and shifted like living things. Mara placed a chair near the window and sat beside Lilith. "I will teach you the words," Mara whispered. "Not all at once. First, the simplest sounds. You do not have to fear them." She guided Lilith's tongue, showing her how to form shapes with her lips and move her voice gently. At first, Lilith struggled. Her throat felt strange, as if a new power was awakening inside her. But Mara's steady presence and encouragement eased her fears. Slowly, a small sound escaped, a soft, almost breath-like syllable. Mara's heart soared. "You did it," she said, her voice trembling. "You spoke your first word." Lilith's eyes widened, and she glanced at Mara with wonder and pride. The act was small, yet monumental, a tiny rebellion against the silence that had defined her entire life. The joy was short-lived. From a distant tower, a shadow moved across the moonlight, unseen by the castle's inhabitants. The rival vampire had returned, drawn by the sound of Lilith's first word. He hissed softly, his fangs glinting. "So she awakens," he murmured, "and her protector grows ever closer." Soon the games begin. Days passed, and Mara continued her lessons, guiding Lilith through small sounds, gestures, and drawings. Each lesson deepened their bond, weaving trust and reliance. Lilith began to smile more, her eyes reflecting curiosity and courage. Mara, too, found herself changed, her purpose strengthened, her resolve deepened. She was no longer simply a servant. She was a guardian, a teacher, and a confidant. But danger never slept. One evening, as the castle prepared for a small moonlit gathering in the garden, Mara sensed it first, a shift in the air, a tension that prickled her senses. Lilith, unaware, wandered among the roses, her fingers brushing petals, delighting in the fragrance. Mara followed closely, her eyes scanning the shadows. Suddenly, movement flickered among the hedges. Mara's hand shot to Lilith, pulling her behind a marble column just as a figure lunged forward. The rival vampire had infiltrated the garden, his eyes burning with intent. His claws barely missed Mara as she spun to face him, dagger drawn. "Stay behind me," Mara commanded, her voice low but firm. Lilith pressed against her, trembling, yet her eyes shone with determination. Something deep within stirred, the same power that had given her voice in the quiet of her room. The intruder hissed and circled them, his fangs bared. "The princess is mine," he said. "She will serve my clan or she will die." Mara's heart pounded, but she held her ground, shielding Lilith as best she could. Then something extraordinary happened. Lilith's hand rose, trembling, and a soft sound, a pure, clear note, escaped her lips. It was not a word, yet it resonated like a ripple through the night air, vibrating against stone and shadow. The rival vampire recoiled, confused, his claws lowering as an invisible force pressed against him. Lilith's first use of her voice, combined with her innate power, had an effect no one could have predicted. The shadow of the enemy faltered, uncertainty breaking his confidence. Mara's eyes widened. "Lilith, you did it," she whispered. The young princess's eyes met hers, wide with wonder and a spark of newfound courage. The rival vampire hissed again, realizing the situation had changed. He retreated into the darkness, leaving a trail of cold wind in his wake. Mara pulled Lilith close, wrapping her arms around the trembling girl. "You are stronger than you know," she said, her voice thick with relief. "And together we can face whatever comes." That night the castle seemed to hold its breath. Lilith lay in her bed, her small hand clutching Mara's. For the first time, she understood that her silence had been both a shield and a hidden strength. And Mara, watching her, understood that their bond was unbreakable, a connection forged not through words alone, but through trust, courage, and shared purpose. In the great hall, unseen and silent, the vampire king observed the lights in Lilith's room. His expression was unreadable, but within him stirred a new emotion, a mixture of awe, fear, and something he could not name. He had ruled the night for centuries, yet he had never truly seen his daughter until now. And in that moment, he realized that the child who had been voiceless for so long was awakening, not only in speech, but in power and spirit. Outside the castle walls, in the moonlit forest, the rival vampire plotted his next move. "She awakens," he murmured, his voice cold as ice, "and the Black Maid protects her. This is no ordinary child. Soon the world will know her power, and we will see whose will is stronger." Back in the castle, Lilith fell asleep with Mara by her side, a small smile on her lips. Her dreams were filled with moonlight, flowers, and whispers of words yet unspoken. She did not yet know the full measure of her power, nor the dangers that awaited her. But she knew one thing: she was no longer alone. She had Mara, and together they would face whatever darkness dared approach. The castle itself seemed to sigh, as if aware that the first threads of fate were being woven. Shadows deepened in corners, and whispers of old curses drifted through the halls. Lilith's journey had begun, and with her first sound, the stage was set for trials, dangers, and revelations that would shape the destiny of the Crimson Castle and all who dwelled within. The castle walls were quiet, but the tension inside was almost unbearable. The air felt thick with anticipation, and every shadow seemed to move with its own purpose. Lilith had grown in courage since her first sound. Each day, she practiced with Mara, learning not only to speak, but also to control the strange energy that her voice carried. Even the simplest syllables seemed to ripple through the air, touching hearts and stirring feelings in ways she did not fully understand. Mara had been her guide, her protector, and her teacher. She showed Lilith how to focus, how to use her voice with care, and how to remain calm when the world felt heavy and threatening. Lilith listened carefully, absorbing each lesson with an intensity that both impressed and alarmed Mara. There was a fire within the young princess, a hidden strength that Mara had only glimpsed before, and it now shone clearly in her eyes. Lord Werewolf, the vampire king, observed from the shadows of his private chamber. The once distant and cold father could not ignore what he saw. Lilith's voice, her courage, and the bond she shared with Mara stirred emotions within him that he had long buried: fear, pride, and even longing. He had ruled the kingdom with iron precision, feared and respected by all, yet his daughter's growth made him realize how little he truly understood her. The rival vampire, however, had not forgotten Lilith. From the dark forests beyond the castle, he plotted in silence. His crimson eyes burned with anger and fascination. "She grows stronger every day," he muttered, his fangs glinting, "and the Black Maid shields her. Soon I will see the full measure of this child's power and decide if it will serve me or be destroyed." He disappeared into the shadows like a living phantom, leaving only a cold wind as a warning. Inside the castle, preparations for the Moon Festival were underway. The halls were adorned with silver banners, and lanterns of pale blue light flickered in every corner. The festival was a celebration of the vampire line, a chance for nobles from surrounding lands to witness the power and wealth of Lord Werewolf. Lilith had never attended before. The thought of being among so many people, so many eyes, made her nervous, but Mara remained at her side, her presence steady and reassuring. "Remember, Lilith," Mara whispered as they walked through the halls, "your voice is a gift. Use it when needed, but be careful. Not everyone will understand." Lilith nodded, gripping Mara's hand tightly. She had begun to understand the weight of her own power and the responsibility it carried. The festival began with music and dancing, the noble guests moving gracefully under the silver light. Lilith stayed at the edge of the hall, observing quietly. She noticed how the courtiers glanced at her, whispering behind fans and hands. Some were curious, some fearful, and others clearly jealous of her unusual abilities. Mara guided her carefully, keeping her close and alert. Then, from the far end of the hall, a disturbance rippled through the crowd. The rival vampire had infiltrated the gathering, disguised under a mask, moving like a shadow among the nobles. His gaze found Lilith immediately, and a faint smile curved his lips. He did not approach openly. Instead, he began to weave through the crowd, testing the castle's defenses and observing the princess. Mara noticed him first. Her senses, sharpened by years of vigilance, picked up the subtle shifts, the slight tension in the air, the faint ripple of energy that indicated a predator was near. She moved closer to Lilith, shielding her body subtly while keeping her eyes on the intruder. "Stay calm," Mara murmured. "Do not let him see fear." Lilith nodded, her small hands gripping Mara's dress. Deep inside, she felt a surge of courage. The lessons, the practice, and the trust she had built with Mara all came together in that moment. She was no longer just a silent observer. She was a participant in her own destiny. The rival vampire reached a secluded corner of the hall, unnoticed by the guards. He released a subtle pulse of his own energy, meant to unsettle Lilith, to test her control. But Lilith was ready. She took a deep breath, feeling the power within her stir. A single word escaped her lips, soft, clear, and resonant. The sound rippled through the hall like a gentle wind, yet it carried a force that shook the intruder's focus. He staggered, momentarily thrown off balance. Mara's eyes widened in recognition. Lilith had learned to use her voice deliberately, and the effect was stronger than either of them had imagined. The rival vampire hissed, his plan disrupted, and he realized that the princess's power was not to be underestimated. "Good," Mara whispered, her hand squeezing Lilith's reassuringly. "You did not falter. You have control." Lilith's eyes shone with pride, and she felt a strange warmth spreading through her chest. Her silence had always protected her, but now her voice gave her strength. The rival vampire retreated into the shadows of the castle, his anger simmering. He had underestimated the young princess and her guardian. "This is not over," he hissed. "Soon, the world will witness her power, and I will be ready." That night, Mara led Lilith to the castle's hidden chambers, a labyrinth of corridors and rooms that even many of the guards did not know existed. Here, Mara could teach Lilith without interruption, without the eyes of the court or the threat of intruders. "Your voice is not just sound," Mara explained, her fingers tracing gentle patterns in the air. "It carries intent, emotion, and even influence. When you speak, you can touch hearts and minds. But you must learn restraint, for power without control can be dangerous." Lilith listened intently, absorbing every word. Mara guided her through exercises, subtle sounds, controlled breathing, and the use of emotions to strengthen her influence. Lilith responded quickly, amazed at the sensations that spread through her body when she spoke. Each word, each note, was a bridge to the world she had been kept from, a way to reach others without fear. Meanwhile, Lord Vaelric observed these lessons from afar. He had begun to feel emotions he had long buried: pride, awe, and a hint of fear. The child he had considered fragile was growing stronger, more aware, and more independent than he had ever imagined. And Mara, the one he had trusted for years, was teaching her with patience and wisdom that even he could not match. The night passed, and the castle grew still. Lilith lay on her bed, exhausted but happy, her mind filled with visions of words and power. Mara sat beside her, watching over her as always. "You are ready," Mara whispered finally. "Tomorrow we will practice more, and soon you will learn to use your voice fully." Lilith's fingers brushed Mara's hand, a gesture of trust, gratitude, and friendship. The peace was short-lived. In the forest beyond the castle, the rival vampire gathered allies. He called upon the remnants of his clan, sharing word of the princess's growing power. "She awakens," he told them, his voice cold and commanding. "The Black Maid shields her and the Vampire King's castle hides her. But soon, we will see if her power is enough to resist us, or if we will claim it for ourselves. Back in the castle, Lilith woke with a start. She had dreamt of the rival vampire, his shadowy form moving closer, and the sense of danger made her heart pound. Mara was immediately alert, her hands steady on Lilith's shoulders. "It is only a dream," Mara whispered, "but we must be vigilant. He will try again." Over the next few days, Lilith and Mara trained constantly. The princess's voice grew stronger, and with it, her confidence. She could now form short words, phrases, and even modulate her tone to influence those around her subtly. Mara watched with pride, but also with concern. Every lesson made Lilith stronger, but it also drew attention. The rival vampire's shadow loomed ever closer. During a moonlit evening in the castle garden, Lilith tested her abilities. She sang a simple note, soft but resonant. Flowers stirred in the breeze, and the leaves of the trees rustled as if responding to her voice. Mara's eyes shone with wonder. "You are extraordinary," she said, her voice full of admiration. Lilith blushed slightly, not from vanity, but from the joy of discovery. Suddenly, a movement flickered at the edge of the garden. Mara tensed immediately, signaling Lilith to stay close. The rival vampire had returned, this time bolder. He moved with confidence, his eyes fixed on the princess. "She grows stronger," he muttered. "Soon her power will be mine or destroyed." Mara's hand tightened on Lilith's. "We must be ready," she whispered. "No matter what comes, we face it together." Lilith nodded, her small hand gripping Mara's tightly. For the first time, she felt that she was not a helpless child, but a participant in her own fate, and that the bond she shared with Mara was a force stronger than fear. The castle seemed to hold its breath, aware of the tension that hung in the air. Shadows lengthened, and the night carried a sense of impending conflict. Lilith's journey was no longer just about finding her voice. It was about understanding the strength within her and learning to wield it with courage, wisdom, and heart. The castle lay beneath a silver moon, quiet yet alive with tension. The gardens shimmered under the moonlight, and the shadows in the halls seemed to move with a life of their own. Lilith stood near the balcony, her violet eyes reflecting the night sky. She had grown much in the past days. Her voice was stronger, her courage deeper, and her connection with Mara unbreakable. Mara approached silently, her hand resting gently on Lilith's shoulder. "Tonight, everything changes," she whispered. "The rival will strike, and we must be ready. But remember, Lilith, your strength is not just in your voice. It is in your heart and your choices." Lilith nodded, swallowing the nervousness that had always accompanied danger. She had come far from the silent, timid girl who first clutched Mara's hand. Her silence had been replaced with determination, and the world, for all its shadows, now felt like something she could face. From the forest beyond the castle, the rival vampire watched. His eyes glowed crimson and his fangs caught the moonlight. He had gathered his clan, and his plan was clear. He would take the princess by force, claiming her power for his own. "She has grown strong," he hissed, "but she has yet to see the full measure of darkness. Soon she will learn fear and obedience." Inside the castle, Lord Vailric moved silently through the halls. The vampire king had observed his daughter and Mara for days, learning, analyzing, and feeling emotions he had long suppressed. Pride, awe, and a deep, hidden love stirred within him. He had once ruled with fear alone, but now he understood that true strength came not from dominance, but from trust, protection, and love. The alarm sounded suddenly, a faint bell ringing through the castle corridors alerting Mara and Lilith to danger. Mara's hand gripped Lilith's tightly. "He's here," she whispered. The princess's heart pounded, but she did not falter. She was ready. The rival vampire and his clan had breached the outer walls, moving like shadows among the corridors. Their eyes glowed with hunger for power, their fangs sharp, but they underestimated the princess. Mara guided Lilith through hidden passages, teaching her to focus and control the subtle energy that her voice could produce. "Remember," Mara whispered, "your voice can protect, persuade, and calm. It can turn fear into hesitation. You are more than silence, you are power itself." Lilith's fingers trembled on Mara's hand, but she nodded. She was ready to act. The confrontation came in the castle's grand hall, a space of stone pillars, silver banners, and flickering torches. The rival vampire stepped forward, his clan surrounding him like shadows given form. "The princess belongs to me," he growled. "Give her to me willingly, or she dies tonight." Mara stepped protectively in front of Lilith. "You will not touch her," she said firmly. Her voice was calm but resolute, carrying authority that even the intruders could feel. Lilith stood beside her, feeling the warmth of courage spread through her chest. She took a deep breath, preparing to speak, not out of fear but with intent and focus. The rival vampire laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "So the mute child has found her voice," he sneered. "Show me what you are capable of." Lilith raised her head. The words she spoke were clear, resonant, and steady. She did not shout, but her voice carried a strength that none of them had expected. A wave of energy spread through the hall, rippling through the stone walls and flickering torches. The rival vampire's eyes widened. He had underestimated the child's true power. One by one, his clan faltered. Confusion and hesitation overtook them, their attacks slowing as Lilith's voice filled the room. The words were simple, yet they carried authority, influence, and intent. Mara watched, amazed at the control and focus Lilith displayed. The princess's voice had become more than sound, it was a force of will. The rival vampire hissed, fury burning in his eyes. He moved forward, attempting to reach Lilith, but the vampire king appeared behind him, a shadow of authority and power. Lord Vailric's presence alone sent the intruders staggering back. His eyes, pale as the moonlight, reflected both power and something softer, a rare warmth he reserved for his daughter and Mara. "You will not harm her," Vailric said, his voice deep and commanding. Even the rival vampire froze. The balance of power had shifted. The child was no longer alone, and the vampire king's wrath was immediate and undeniable. Lilith's confidence grew. She spoke again, her voice resonating with intention. The intruders faltered, their resolve weakening as the princess's words carried clarity, calm, and strength. She was no longer the silent child. They were facing a young woman capable of commanding respect, of influencing even the darkest of hearts. Mara's eyes shone with pride. "You are extraordinary, Lilith," she whispered. The princess smiled faintly, realizing for the first time that she could act in her own defense and protect those she loved. Her voice had become a shield, a beacon, and a weapon of subtle power. The rival vampire, realizing his plan had failed, attempted to retreat, but Lord Vailric's presence blocked the exit. He stepped forward, his pale eyes glowing with authority. "Leave now," he commanded, "and never return." The intruder hissed but had no choice. He vanished into the night, his clan scattering like shadows in the wind. The hall was silent once more. Lilith stood tall, her violet eyes reflecting triumph and relief. Mara approached, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. "You were brave and you were strong. Your voice is yours and you used it wisely." Lord Vailric watched, a rare expression of warmth and pride crossing his features. "You have grown," he said quietly, almost to himself, "stronger than I could have imagined. And you are not alone, my daughter." Lilith turned to face him, her eyes filled with understanding. She had always longed for connection with her father, and now she felt it, an unspoken acknowledgement, a bond slowly forming. The castle seemed to exhale, the tension easing. Shadows still lingered in the corners, but the immediate threat had passed. The princess had not only discovered her voice, but she had also discovered courage, purpose, and connection. In the days that followed, the castle began to change. Lilith continued her lessons with Mara, refining her abilities, learning to use her voice to communicate clearly, to influence, and even to calm others. The court watched in awe as the once voiceless princess began to speak and act with confidence. Nobles who had feared her now approached with respect, and the whispers of curses and weakness faded into silence. Lord Vailric took more notice of his daughter and Mara. He began to engage with Lilith, asking her questions, listening to her thoughts, and slowly bridging the distance that had separated them for years. Mara, too, was recognized not just as a servant, but as a guardian and teacher, someone whose wisdom and loyalty were invaluable. One evening, under the silver moon, Lilith and Mara stood in the castle garden. The air was cool, and the flowers glowed softly in the moonlight. Lilith spoke a full sentence for the first time, her voice steady and melodic. "I am ready for the world." Mara smiled, tears of pride glinting in her eyes. "And the world is ready for you," she replied. The vampire king watched from a balcony above, a rare smile on his pale lips. He had seen his daughter emerge from silence and fear into strength and purpose. He understood now that true power was not only in ruling with fear, but in nurturing, guiding, and protecting those who mattered most. The rival vampire's threat had been quelled, but even in victory, Mara and Lilith knew the shadows would not remain idle forever. The young princess had awakened a power that would attract attention beyond the castle walls, but she also knew she would not face it alone. Mara would stand by her, and her father, once distant and cold, would now protect and guide her. As the castle settled into quiet again, Lilith raised her voice once more, singing a soft melody that filled the halls and gardens alike. It was a song of hope, courage, and the promise of new beginnings. The air shimmered with the resonance of her voice, and even the walls seemed to glow with approval. Mara stood beside her, proud and protective, and Lord Vailric watched silently from above. The Crimson Castle, once a place of whispers and fear, now held light and warmth within its walls. The princess had discovered her voice, her strength, and her place in the world. Yet far beyond the mountains, in the deep forests where shadows lingered, a new presence stirred, another force drawn to Lilith's unique power. Mara sensed it first, a subtle shift in the wind, a quiet ripple of energy that carried both curiosity and warning. Lilith felt it too, a shiver running through her, but she smiled. "We are ready," she whispered, gripping Mara's hand. Together, they were no longer afraid of the shadows. The night sky held promise and mystery, and the story of the Vampire King's daughter was far from over. But for now, in the gardens of the Crimson Castle, there was peace. Lilith had found her voice, her courage, and her family, and as her melody echoed through the moonlit halls, it carried with it the certainty of hope, strength, and love.